with me now, CNN political commentator Van Jones, May Mailman, former Trump White House attorney, and Mark McKinnon, executive producer of The Circus and former advisor to George W. Bush. Glad to have you all here. Let me begin with you, May, because I like the color pink and you're in the center, and I want to hear your voice about this. So let me ask you this question. Trump is in Montana to campaign for a Senate candidate. Montana is not necessarily a battleground state, and I'm using the word necessarily generously. Why do you think he's going there? Is it really about Tester? What's the reason you see?
I do. I think you're going to meet with donors, so that's important too. But also, what's the point of being president if you don't have the Senate? You need the Senate to confirm your traditional nominees. You need the Senate to get your cabinet passed. But he does need to visit swing states. I think that is true. And I think he will visit those swing states. But Montana is certainly important because you've got to flip the Senate if you're going to be an effective Republican president.
You know, on that point, and it's important to think about, Van, I think the larger question I keep thinking about is this looks different, the campaigning, since 2016 or 2020. There's a lot of a familiar playbook that's happening as well when it comes to insults being hurled and otherwise. We're hearing a lot about how Trump has been stewing off the campaign trail because some of the attacks he's saying are frankly not as effective as they have been against prior candidates. Why do you think he's on the trail in the way that he is? Is it reactive to trying to take some wind out of the sails? And is Montana the way to do so?
This is a fading Vegas act. Donald Trump is like Barry Manilow singing Mandy just one more time. Like, guys, it's
so
tired.
Hell of a song.
It's old. It's not working, and it's over. And so, what do? You scamper back to some little corner of the country where you can get a hug and a kiss and a cookie, and somebody can pat you on the head and laugh at all your old stale jokes. But the soda, the fizz has come out of the soda, and this thing is in the toilet and starting to swirl.
Wow, that's a very visual analogy indeed. Mark McKinnon, let me turn to you. Do you see this as a fading Vegas act or one that he hopes to rejuvenate and revitalize the campaign by, as May is talking about, trying to make sure that if he were to secure the Oval Office, he's not going to be essentially a lame duck?
Fading Vegas act is the perfect description. I was thinking of old Elvis. It feels like old Elvis. And Elvis has left the building. But, you know, I'll tell you what really struck me today, Laura, is that in late 2015, the very first time that I went to see Donald Trump was in Arizona. And I remember going there, and I remember it being 105 degrees, and that there were people lined up for miles, and I was just dumbstruck. And I said, wow, something's happening here. Well, today, the exact same thing was happening on the ground in Arizona with Kamala Harris. 105 degrees, miles of people standing there. So this really feels like more like a movement than a moment, and that's what it's going to be required to beat Donald Trump. And I think it's a really interesting observation that Peggy Noonan made to say when she wrote that she wasn't sure whether or not Harris had actually created the movement or the movement had created her. Meaning, I think that it's this pent up energy, particularly among Democrats and independents, for this joyous kind of this joyride that's happening right now. It's just flowing. And it's really lighting up with jet fuel because of the joy factor, which is something I wrote about today in Vanity Fair.
I have to say, and first of all, to anyone who will tell you in Arizona that 105 is okay because it's a dry heat, I say to you, no, it's oppressive. But everyone else on this same point, May, when we think about this, some of the things that have re-energized the base for Democrats has been about the absence of a rematch between Trump and Biden. But some of the things that were concerning to voters, concerning to Trump specifically, and concerning to those who were encouraging Biden to not run for re-election were about age and mental fitness. Now Harris on the top of the ticket. And during his press conference yesterday, Trump claimed that he nearly died in a helicopter crash with the former San Francisco mayor, Willie Brown, who once had a relationship of some kind with Harris. I want you to listen to what Brown had to say tonight, and also Pete Buttigieg on this very point. Listen.
Have you ever been in a helicopter that made an emergency landing with Donald Trump?
No.
Have you ever been in a helicopter with Donald Trump?
No.
You have no memory of anything like that ever happening?
No.
You can just tell that he's lost a step. He's getting mushier, fuzzier, more confused. You look at this press conference, he declared that he was in a helicopter that went down with Willie Brown on board. He's never even been in a helicopter with Willie Brown. And it does raise some real concerns about what's happened to Donald Trump over the years, right?
May, that was an extraordinary point, especially for somebody who wants to suggest that his acumen and his acuity is as sharp as a tack.
Yeah, I mean, he does sit, though, for these lengthy press conferences, combative press conferences that range from everything to foreign policy to, candidates that he's barely had time to research. So I don't know if Trump telling stories is just part of the water at this point. I don't really think that that's going to affect the election. What is going to affect the election, I think, is the momentum. And where did it come from? Because nobody has learned anything about Kamala Harris. She doesn't even have a policy section on her website. She's able to distance herself from everything that she's done, but able to take credit for everything that the same administration has done. And so it's really hard to find a line of attack there. And that needs to be the next point, because this momentum doesn't feel organic. I don't know whether she created it or it created her, but it just came out of nowhere. And it's really, I think, therefore, hard to target.
Van, what do you think about that?
Well, I see it very differently. First of all, Nikki Haley said, and she was right when she said it, that the first party to retire their nearly 80-year-old frontrunner was going to win. It didn't come out of nowhere. Nobody in this country wanted this matchup. Nobody. 70%, 80% of the country said, please, for God's sakes, don't do this to us again. And so literally, if anybody had said, well, I don't know, maybe we don't do the two most unpopular people again, just throw anybody, you would have caught this wave. This wave was out there. It was wanting something. But don't take anything away from Kamala Harris, this idea. There's 1,000 ways to get this wrong, and only a couple ways to get it right, even in this environment. And Kamala Harris has played this brilliantly. She has not put one foot wrong yet. Now, she's got to get through some interviews. She's got to get through the debate. A lot of things can happen. But right now, 100 politicians given this opportunity would have screwed it up 12. This party is not easy to unite. This party is not easy to lead. This party is not easy in any way. This party is like a dysfunctional family on a good day, and she has somehow got everybody at the kitchen table acting right. And that you got to give her the credit for that.
Excuse me, Van. Mark, I want to go to you on this because, I've heard this discussion that May has raised about the chicken or the egg, the idea of, the generic nature not having a campaign platform. On the other hand, to Van's point, there has been a unifying and cohesive coalescing around her for the reasons that, are being demonstrated by poll numbers, by fundraising and beyond. When you look at the landscape of this, what do you say to the attacks that she is a generic candidate, or that her failure to have interviews is going to be destructive in the long run to her campaign?
She's been running for 2 weeks. I mean, give it
There
some
you go.
time. I mean,
End of story.
I saw tape of her today on the tarmac taking questions. I mean, she's been vice president for almost 4 years. We've seen her a lot. I mean, she's not some unknown character that came out of the mist, for God's sakes. And by the way, we're going to have a Democratic convention in a week where she's going to lay out her ideas and her platform and her vision for the country. Take an aspirin, people.
Well, there you go. I mean,
Amen.
that's a T-shirt, by the way. May, I'll ask you on this point, though. You did say and suggest that, look, Trump's out there. He's in front of, and you think, combative interviews and beyond. But he's not talking about policy. He's not talking about his platform. I mean, the idea that Harris is not having, I think you mentioned a webpage devoted to it. When Trump is in front of the cameras, when he's talking to people and waiting to see what he'll say tonight, he's not driving home the points on policy that I think would bring into the fold more voters. So he's just talking about personal attacks and beyond and making comments about helicopters and whatnot. Is he helping himself when he's in front of the cameras? Because that's an opportunity he's missing.
But I think that that's not exactly right. I think he does talk about the issues. So when Trump talks about securing the border, you actually know what he's talking about, right? Because he had remained in Mexico and used tools at the border that actually were effective, including COVID-era tools. Some of them might not be available later, but we can actually have a conversation about that. When Kamala Harris, running also on securing the border, it's very strange because what do you mean? I mean, you are the administration now. You could secure the border. You're saying that it's Congress's fault. So I think that it's different to have a policy conversation because Trump can actually just say, I was president. I like those policies. I would do that. Kamala Harris, what would you do? We don't know.
May, I had to say, excuse me, I had to say, if the campaign on either side is, I was president, I like these policies, that's not going to be effective for voters who want more than just the answer. They want the process. That's part of the platforming and the campaigning. Van, real quick point, what do you want to say?
Well, I was just going to say, she just put out some pretty good ads explaining what she would do. She would implement the bill that Trump stopped. She literally was a part of putting together a bipartisan deal that would have fixed all this stuff, and it was Trump who didn't want it. And so if he wants to own the border issue, he's got to own the fact that he stopped it from getting fixed last year.
I'll be curious to see what he has to say tonight, but we're all going to take Mark McKinnon's advice right now. Go take an aspirin. Thank you so much, everyone.